Thank you all for joining us. From my home, I'd like to acknowledge the unceded lands of the Goshute, Eastern Shoshone, and Ute peoples, and the continued existence and contributions of Indigenous people who have lived on and cared for this land for thousands of years. Thank you all again. My name is Brandy Strand, and I am the Director of Community Relationships for the Utah Nonprofits Association. I'm very excited to be able to have everyone here with us today as we do a recap of the 2021 legislative session. Just one moment, I have a video. Can you all see that? Yes.
What an amazing video. Good afternoon. My name is Kate Rubicava. I'm the CEO of the UNA, and I use the pronoun she, her. And I'm really happy to be here today. Huge shout out to Brandy for making that wonderful video showcasing our new and improved Nonprofit Days on the Hill that we did this year. I really appreciate each of you spending your time today to do this legislative recap. And I'm really excited to learn from our presenters. The state legislative process is really involved and it's complicated, and it requires a great deal of patience and ingenuity. So every year that I've been able to engage in the state legislative process, I learned something new. I was never trained as a policy person. I never had roots in policy, and my only formal training was really learning on the fly when I stepped into this role at UNA about 5 years ago. And it thrust me into the role of policy making. And what I learned quite quickly is that I had to forfeit any embarrassment about what I didn't know, and I have to remain that way. I have to remain completely unembarrassed, and I have to ask a lot of questions, because through that process, it has led me to be able to make lots of really good decisions and calculated decisions about policymaking that impacts the nonprofit sector. And in Utah, we're fortunate to have an accessible part-time legislature. And by and large, our state legislators are available. But as residents and voting members of the public, it really is unfortunately up to us to figure out how to track our legislators down and to really get involved and learn. But what I learned this year is that our elected officials are really only and I don't want to say a small portion, but they're really only a portion of the larger process that is involved in making our state run. And so the biggest piece is that what I learned is that we as a community, as a society, we place a lot of weight on our elected officials. But there are really others who are behind the scenes whose job it is to move things forward in our state. Some of these folks are not always elected, some are appointed, but most of them got hired to do a job just like you and I got hired. And that was the biggest takeaway for me this year. You all just saw the video capturing all of the meetings that we set up for Nonprofit Days on the Hill with key folks in key offices in our state government. And in all of those offices, there are dedicated professionals who are willing to help along the way. And there was some valuable knowledge that was gained there. And as a plug, we have all of those recordings available, and Brandy can point you to those, but I'm pretty sure they're somewhere in and around our Member Central resources for you to take a look at. But in terms of what UNA did and what we've been doing during this legislative session, we spent a considerable amount of time over the last 9 months advocating for and lobbying to get a state charitable deduction on our state taxes, which would be an above the line state deduction, which would mean that even if you don't itemize your taxes, but you do give to nonprofits, then you might get a deduction for that cash gift that you provided. Essentially, what it hoped to do was mirror the current federal itemizer that Senator Lee championed for us for 2019 and 2020 taxes, and is presently pushing for a 2021 itemizer as well. In the state charitable deduction, we were unsuccessful this year. The price tag was too much, and no one seemed to be willing to expend any of their political capital in getting us to the finish line. We spoke to Democrats, we spoke to Republicans. We got a lot of praise for the bill and a lot of soft promises for next year. So we're just taking all of that in, and in April, we're going to be back at it again. But I wanted to point something out. We're here to talk about our state legislative body. But I want to go back to the component about what I said about Senator Lee earlier and a state charitable deduction. I have been meeting with Senator Lee's staff since 2016, talking to them and providing them data and information about a universal charitable giving incentive, similar to what he pushed for 2019 and 2020 taxes and is presently pushing for 2021. And I can't say that I'm the reason that he pushed for a federal itemizer. But what I do know is that through collective advocacy and lobbying across the country from other state associations, hopefully that likely helped to shed a light on that issue, and it did bring that forward. And that's something that we've also been tracking during this time. Another helpful nugget that I have learned over the years really is around the relationships that you build. And it's really important to make sure that you're building those relationships with folks. And the increased access to testifying, to joining a committee, and to looking at past recordings is really amazing here in Utah. So with really great relationships, some solid research capabilities, you can really find a lot of information. And no matter how planned you can be, no matter what system you have to track the bills, no matter if you have a committee that screens, as does UNA, and no matter how frequently you look at the listings of new bills that are introduced, it's highly possible that things don't necessarily pop for you or come to your notice immediately. So that's where a solid network of folks comes in that can help you along your policy journey. So the network that UNA has built over the years is really how I came to be alerted about House Bill 120. It was around unemployment insurance amendments. And I got a random text message from a colleague with a question about the bill. And then the legislator was brought into that text message. And over the course of about 2 weeks, maybe it wasn't even a full 2 weeks, maybe it was only a week, through a group text message, the three of us were able to correct the bill language and to make it better, both for nonprofits and for workers. And that particular bill, House Bill 120, corrected a very minor problem in the code. There are some nonprofits that don't have to pay for unemployment, and they don't have to notify, or they didn't have to notify their employees. So this law has to do with a combination of a number of employees that an employer has, and then the number of hours each week that those employees work. So going into this, and when I got that random text message, I was always under the impression that all businesses were required to pay unemployment benefits if the state deemed necessary to employees. So this bill didn't make any sense to me. And in order for me to respond, to be able to provide an adequate assessment, I had to do a couple things. I had to read the bill. I had to look at the links in the bill language that connected to the code that was said to be modified. I called DWS, which is the Department of Workforce Services, which issues unemployment. I had multiple conversations with my team to see if they understood what I understood about the language. And then I read the bill again and again to make sure that I understood how I was responding, and then also how I could craft the correction in the bill language so that it could be more nonprofit friendly. So that was a process that I underwent to make sure that there wasn't a shady nonprofit bill that was passed. And when that bill finally came up in committee, I was able to testify virtually in support of the bill. And I know that there are some of us who are here with us today who hopefully will talk about their testifying experience. And I know that there are a wide variety of opinions about when you should be testifying in person versus a virtual testifying. But for something like this, because it was an agreed upon bill, it wasn't very controversial, I felt like testifying virtually was an adequate solution. And I just feel like as we look at all of our policy endeavors, and I'm sure we're going to learn quite a bit about this today, but much of what we do in the policy realm really is this high mix of offensive and defensive maneuvers. There are always things that I would do differently, but I can't worry too much about those things. You have to course correct, and you have to adjust, and you have to trust that you're doing the best job that you can to advance your mission. But it's just important to remain, I think, aware of the multifaceted approach it takes to create policy. Now, a couple of years ago, there was a bill that UNA was alerted to in the state legislature that we learned way too late in the process. It was like already past committee and up for votes and the whole 9 yards. And it was a bad bill. It had some bad language for nonprofit organizations. And so when I started having that conversation with the representative, who later became a senator the next year, I was really like advocating to have the language changed. And he said to me, we can't do it this year, but you know what? We're going to fix it next year. Like, don't worry, we're going to fix it next year. And he kept his word, and I followed up with him to make sure that he would keep his word. And in fact, it was fixed the next year. So there are times when it just takes time to get something, changed, to get a good law written, that kind of thing. And from my perspective, when we're really looking at high level at how to affect change in our communities, we really have to focus on what we can at that time and what needs our attention. But we also have to think strategically about some of the next steps so that we can set ourselves up for the future project that we need to tackle. A state charitable giving deduction is one such example that we were unsuccessful in doing, but we are laying the groundwork and remain to lay the groundwork for us, hopefully getting it on an interim agenda so that we can continue moving through the policy. And the sort of last takeaways I will say is that policy happens 12 months out of the year. It's not a 45 days scene within our legislative session. That's just, when they're officially in session. But there is so much that can be done 12 months out of the year, and developing those relationships, building that network of people around you to look out for bills, to tap you when you need to be brought into a conversation that you might not be aware of, is a huge part of building up the social capital so that we can all make smart policy. And it can take years, and I don't want anyone to feel sort of dismayed about the process, because it can take a long time to create change, and that's okay. I mean, it's all part of a process. So those are UNA's nuggets of some of the things that we've been doing this legislative session. And with that, I will pass my time over to Chris with Bike Utah to talk about appropriations.
Yeah, we're not going. We'll mention appropriations. We're just going to talk a little bit about our experience with a couple different things. So let me pull up my screen. Hopefully this works. And can you see the presentation?
We're getting a little bit of a weird, it almost looks like a mobile window. Okay. We could see it before you went, see, now we have full screen.
Okay, I'll just leave it over here. That's weird. Okay.
Full screen.
Awesome. All right, so I am Chris Lee with Bike Utah. I'm the executive director here. I've been in this position for 2 years. Prior to this, I was the director of an international development nonprofit. So this really was my first time doing anything with the legislature, and my second legislative session with Bike Utah. This is me here with my daughter. We love to ride bikes, which is why I took this position. So really quickly, Bike Utah is Utah's statewide bicycle advocacy organization. We do a lot of different initiatives. I wanted to give an overview of everything kind of that we do, so you can get kind of an idea of what our bandwidth is and like what we work on, right? So we have about 10 staff members. Several of them are, a few of them are interns, and yeah, so I wanted to show kind of where our our strategy, or like where our resources are really. So a lot of education initiatives. We have the Youth Best program, bicycle education safety training program. We teach kids around the state how to ride safely at schools in non-pandemic times. We'll be going back to that soon. But that team is kind of pivoted this last year. And then we have the midweek mountain bike series, which is like a very family-friendly mountain biking race series to help people get introduced to that sport and feel comfortable doing so. And then we have the Utah Bike Summit, which is actually in a couple weeks, March 30th through April 1st. So check that out at our website. And then we have our infrastructure work. So this, we do have an ongoing appropriation for this with the Youth Best programming, but it's because we run the governor's 1,000 Miles campaign. So working on 1,000 miles of new family-friendly trails, bicycle lanes, and paths throughout Utah by 2027. We have a couple other infrastructure initiatives, and then these are our advocacy initiatives. We don't have any staff dedicated to these programs, specifically legislative advocacy. Typically, it has been the executive director, and I also do and I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this, I also do all the accounting, budgeting, HR, and help with, fundraising and development. So I want to show you what we do and how we've been able to be really successful with kind of a ragtag crew of people. We're all awesome, by the way, but we're all doing a lot of different things. So these are the resources we have. We have a board member who's a lobbyist, and that has been phenomenal. They are really on top of things and really supportive, and they're really the number one reason why we have an ongoing appropriation, which didn't come up in this legislative session, but it's just ongoing. And then we have limited staff that are all awesome this year because the Youth Best program has been doing different things. We had one staff member available, and she really saved my butt this year and helping me get stuff ready and preparing materials. And then we have our supporters, which Kate had mentioned before. This is really important, and developing this over. This is something that I inherited, right? This is something that I built as the ED. This is something that Bike Utah has been facilitating and building since its foundation, and that's been really critical to making things happen. And then our existing relationships with other organizations like the Wasatch Front Regional Council and other MPOs in Utah that help let us know. We utilize the legislative bill tracker, but it's not that great. And so we also use other ones that are online that better track and let you know where it's at. Cause that's always the question. You get a bill that you're really interested in. You're wait, where is it? Hasn't even gone to committee. Check the agenda. You don't see it on the agenda. So you're what's going on? So I think just Googling and that's kind of what we've learned, Googling and checking with people, seeing what people know to kind of stay up to date on what's going on. And then we utilize our blog and our website and our social media as much, but we have no budget that's dedicated to this. So if you're feeling worried, how do you do this? It's just kind of utilizing your people and your time, which is budget money, but nothing set aside. So just want you to know that you can do this too. These are the types of communications that we do really quickly. So we do one a month. Are you seeing the legislative update or what? We do one once a week, basically throughout the session on only ones that are specific to bicycling, right? Try to keep it very focused. So that people that that's what our supporters are interested in. And sometimes they're tangentially related, but they do impact how cycling will proceed in Utah. So with Governor Cox's new proposed budget, this is our first one. We walk through what proposals in the budget would be beneficial to cycling, why we supported them, what they could do in support of it, reading the full budget proposal, and then going through all the different bills. We only really had 3 that we're really watching, and then other bills that came from the appropriations that occurred. And then we do a wrap up. So this is the end. And as we go through and as we track and get updates on how things are, we like to include a little graphic. So it's really easy to see how things are. We were really fortunate this year, and all the bills we tracked actually passed. It's a great year for cycling. It's probably one of the very few positive things that have come out of this pandemic is that there's been a bicycling boom. We've seen a 52% increase in cycling from 2019 to 2020. Which is incredible. And I think that's why we were so successful in other things. And We also did letters of support. So we created a letter on our website, and again, this is just like, we already have the website. That's like a resource we already maintained. And then we just put this stuff together. So they could either sign Bike Utah's letter. We just created a Google form they could fill out giving us permission. And then we sent that over to the relevant representatives and senators from their group, or they could copy and paste, write their own letters, and then we helped connect them to where to find the representative information. So that's like the communication resource. And for every legislative update, we also did a social media post. So really simple, like very straightforward. I feel like this is kind of like the basic. And so if you are new to this or like not sure what to do, I think this is a great place to kind of start and like get involved in like figuring out what's going on in the legislative session. And then specifically, we wanted to talk about HB 142. So this is the cyclist traffic amendments that we've actually worked with and tried to help pass since 2011. So this is a long-term effort. My predecessor presented with Representative Beckman Moss, I'm pretty sure almost every single time that this went up. And so this year it came up again, and I was the one presenting, and so I'm really lucky because it actually did pass. So again, as Kate had mentioned, like these are often like very long-term efforts, and they may not you may not see results right away, but don't give up hope, because it's like taking time and also getting kind of the right legislative group together. This year, we have a lot of representatives that are really supportive of cycling, and that has been phenomenal. So we saw a lot of really great things. We also saw an appropriation for $35 million, one-time appropriation for $35 million for active transportation funds. And like, we kind of worked on that this past year a little bit too, by like pulling together shovel-ready active transportation projects, showing that there was a need, like preparing a long list. And then ultimately it was another advocacy group that like really got to the transportation committee, appropriations committee, and like got them to like sign off on it. So it's unheard of, unprecedented, really exciting. But I mean, sometimes honestly, I think it's just luck when stuff like this goes through. It's like the right people, the right time, all that. So how I got involved with HB 142 this year is kind of weird. We weren't invited in. We had no idea that it was going on. We just saw it come up on our bill tracker. A lot of people contacted me. I reached out to Representative Moss and was like, hey, what can we do to help? I know we've helped with this on the past. We would love to support. And then we also got connected with other states. So the Stop as Yield law is something that a lot of states are trying to get passed because it does improve cyclist safety. And so we got connected with all these states. They provided us with all this research, and one of my staff members is Utah specific research. We could pull together really great comments. And then we were invited by Representative Moss to present at the House Transportation Committee or to testify, right? And then we told we had 3 minutes. We presented, I got there and they're like, oh, you only have 2. And I had like exactly perfectly like practiced everything down to the minute, right? And so I actually got cut off for time. It was like very nerve-wracking for me. It was over Zoom. But they had so many people that want to present, they like cut it down to 2 minutes. So for the Senate Transportation Committee, because Representative Moss liked all the data that we had presented, she invited us to actually co-present with her for the Senate Transportation Committee. And that was really helpful. And that was cool. Also nerve-wracking because then I had to answer questions from the senators, but it worked out really well. And it was really like awesome to be a part of that. And then ultimately it did pass on the Senate floor last day, like 9 p.m. They voted on it. And I think it was like 27 in favor and 1 nay. So that's like crazy because normally it died in the Senate Transportation Committee or on the Senate floor because they ran out of time. So just like really exciting. We're like really happy to be a part of it. It was a really great legislative session for Bike Utah. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can email me or check out our website. That's where all of our legislative updates are too, if you want to replicate that. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was so great. I love the way you laid out that information. I'm going to turn the time over to Rachel with the Humane Society of Utah.
All right. I am definitely going to share my screen and I'm going to do it well. So let's see. Okay. So I'm the advocacy director for the Humane Society of Utah. We're an organization that focuses on eliminating pain and suffering in animals, as well as preserving the human-animal bond. Been around for 61 years. This is our 61st year. It is only my full second year with the organization. And in that time that we've been around, we never had an advocacy department, so I actually started it. So our legislative goals for this year included introducing this department to stakeholders. Because we never had one, what we were doing in the past was a little haphazard, a little crazy, not super focused. So I really wanted to make sure when we introduced ourselves to stakeholders that we were representing ourselves as the professional, rational, reasonable group that we are, and to kind of set us apart from maybe other animal welfare groups in the state and in the country. We work mostly on behalf of our supporters, right? Because they're the ones that we answer to, where we want to do the things that they think are important. And we also love to assist our partners. Our biggest partners are animal control. That's who we transfer animals from, work on policy with. We also work somewhat with HSUS. We will be working with Best Friends this upcoming year, and as well as small rescues such as Rough Haven and Nuzzles up near Park City. And of course, all we want to do is help animals, right? But there's a lot of different ways we can do that. Oh, and I should have mentioned, I'm an attorney. I also have a specialization certificate in animal welfare law. So that's what qualifies me to do this job. I didn't just like walk in off the street and say, I want to help animals. So there you go. So this year, every year, we're trying to have like 3 main focuses, because I think that that's doable with the department size, which is me and a part-time person. So the main bill that we really focused on this year was HB 386, which was the Transportation of Dogs bill. It failed miserably, but I will happily tell you about that for the rest of the presentation. But first, I wanted to go over these first 2. HB 426 is therapy animal amendments, and it actually passed, which is lovely. What this bill does is it that's not the right word. It encourages, it mandates that any primary school that has a therapy animal program have therapy animal protocols and policies in place. Therapy animals are extremely beneficial to children to have in schools. It helps build empathy and confidence. It makes them want to participate in things that they normally wouldn't want to, for instance, like gym class. I personally, as a fat kid, was not a big fan. I definitely think if I would have been able to run with a dog, it would have been fantastic. But in the meantime, we haven't had anything like that. So the danger is having bad interactions between dogs and children, and we don't want to do that. So this bill will put in place a way for children to safely interact with animals. And then lastly was a retail pet store ban. This was actually brought forward by HSUS, and we came in at the last minute to try and help a little bit, also failed miserably. This bill particularly, because we came in so late, and there were a lot of mistakes made early on in planning the bill, it was kind of dead at the start, and we knew that, but we thought it was an important conversation to have as the Humane Society. So, Transportation of Dogs bill, what this bill would have done if it didn't fail miserably, would have been to put in place a prohibition on animals riding unrestrained in the back of pickup trucks and flatbed trucks, particularly dogs, and only on high-speed roads. The catalyst is a video that I'm going to show you. It's not graphic. It is a little unsettling. And forgive me if I do this all wrong. There's also no audio on this video, so you're not missing anything if you don't hear anything. So this dog, this video was sent to us over the summer. This is on I-15 near Provo. And it was extremely upsetting for most of our supporters. And as a result, they contacted us relentlessly and said, we really need you to do something about this. And I come from a state where that's not legal at all. I had never experienced anything like that in my life. So we definitely wanted to take the lead in making this change. So we did a couple things right. We involved a volunteer, a very, frankly, just like outstanding volunteer from the get-go, and doing like a grassroots campaign because it was only me in the start, and then later Abby, the part-time person in my department, started. I needed the help. I needed free help, and Ashley is her name, and she was more than willing to provide that. So we did a grassroots campaign of, you know, typical petitions, social media, contacting stakeholders. We met once every 2 weeks, and it was going really well, and we were spreading the word, getting out to the media. I also, when the media would contact us as an organization, we would try and have them instead contact our volunteer. The reason why she was so important is because she had actually witnessed a dog fall from the back of a truck on a freeway with her child in the car. So she had a very emotional connection to this issue. The other thing we did right is we showed intersecting interests, right? So we wanted to appeal to public safety, and we also wanted to appeal to animal welfare. This is not just an animal welfare issue. It's not just a public safety issue, but they're both there. We have some statistics on this. I don't have them right off the top of my head, but the amount of force that an unrestrained dog can cause in an accident can kill a human very easily. Additionally, they cause road hazards when they fall, and obviously just the carnage is pretty nasty for anyone to see, but certainly children. And in the past, our organization, before I started, apparently had tried to pass a bill like this, but was unwilling to budge with agricultural interests, primarily working farm dogs. So we made sure to mitigate the impact of this bill on the agricultural industry by exempting working dogs, not because they're less important by any means, but because we knew that that was an insurmountable task to try and come up against agricultural interests when it comes to animals. What we did wrong, a lot. One of the main things we did wrong is from the get-go, we didn't have a co-sponsor, right? So we had the amazing Representative Ashley Matthews on our side, who is a big public safety advocate, as well as transportation and animal welfare. But she's a Democrat, and she's a freshman Democrat. So we definitely should have looked for more bipartisan support. We didn't do enough communication and outreach to our partners and stakeholders. And this is my fault, fully my fault. Sometimes people in animal advocacy can be robust and really excited and can end up doing a little bit more harm than good. So I was very hesitant to really let in a lot of community partners that I really should have from the get-go with proper training, which is what we're going to be doing next year, this year actually. And of course the delay, right? So this video didn't come to us until early summer. I think the video came in May. We didn't release it until late June. And at that point, it's like the session's basically already over before it starts, right? So this is something that we needed to start on early. And that's what we're doing now. So the lessons learned, start early, start very early. I've already started, our whole department, our organization has started with stakeholders for next year. We are really excited about some of the things we're going to be doing. Some of the stuff that we're talking about, we're still in talks with HSUS and Best Friends about a pet retail sales ban. And we're also working with a group of local rescues and more animal-focused human-focused animal organizations like Rough Haven and the Nuzzles Purple Paw program to maybe do some legislation on the intersection of domestic violence and companion animals. That being said, make it easier for the sponsor. They like simple, bulleted notes. They like to have all of the information ahead of time. Don't make them look bad. You want to just make sure that they look as good as possible when they bring this idea up, and make sure that they're completely prepared. Don't be afraid to loop others in. We're all stronger together, even if something is just kind of tangentially related to your organization. But you also need to know the limits of other parties you choose to work with. To be completely frank, the pet retail sales ban failed because HSUS just didn't have the time, right? They were spread way too thin. So when we got to the committee, so they decided to go with Rep. King, who's a lovely, lovely, lovely human being and really good for animal welfare. But he's not terribly liked right now in the legislature. And as a result, the bill was pushed to the very last part of the very last committee meeting. And they basically just cut the meeting off without even really hearing much about it. It was a little ugly. In addition, HSUS, the Humane Society of the United States, when they presented the bill, it wasn't put in any sort of terms that someone who doesn't really care about animals would care about. They didn't talk about the economic benefits of pet retail sales bans and things of that sort. So you need to know the limits of the people that you involve, and take the lead role where you're strongest and let them take the lead role where they're strongest. Communicate clearly, loudly, and often. There was a constant miscommunication with this bill that we were trying to, pull farm dogs into it, which we of course were not. And so I just was constantly on social media correcting people in comment sections of local news stories. And I think that that's the way you do. You just have to break through the miscommunications. And of course, do not fear failure. It's part of the process. Our last panelist, what she had mentioned that 2011 to now, 10 years, right? That's a long time, but it paid off. So there's no reason to fear failure. You will eventually get there, especially once you get the bill right and the right people in the right place. That's it for me. You can contact me if you're interested, especially if you are involved with a domestic violence. Sorry about that. I do work in a shelter, so there is some barking. If you're involved with a domestic violence organization, or those that want to help homeless people, maintain their relationship with their beloved companions, that's something that we find extremely important here at the Humane Society of Utah. Please contact me. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And I'm seeing some comments here. Training is a great idea of how to teach supporters to be helpful in their efforts. And we may be reaching out to learn how you do that and what you do and all about the system. So thank you so much for sharing. I'd like to turn the time over to Sonia.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sonia Martinez Ortiz. I use the pronouns she, her, hers. I'm the executive director of the Rape Recovery Center. We are actually the only standalone rape crisis center, and what that means here in Utah is we have lots of colleagues that work on issues related to sexual assault, but they also do work related to domestic violence. We are the only standalone organization in the state that focuses solely on sexual assault. In addition to the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault, which is the coalition that we work with. I'm going to just talk about a few things here. First, I think I'm giving you a little bit of background on my experience with policy and how I brought that over to the Rape Recovery Center and how we've sort of shifted as an agency in terms of our work around policy. Give you a couple of real life examples of things that we worked on, and then I'm actually going to show you some sample work that we've done, like actual images, like our bill tracking matrix, a fact sheet, some things that we've integrated into departments and work that we already do, because that's probably a concern for most folks. So as I said, I'm the executive director of the Rape Recovery Center. I do have a past history working in policy work. So my first job out of grad school, I was a policy advocate for community action. Other than being like a citizen, like community organizer, had no training or context or experience. And so I learned a lot working in a full-time job as a policy advocate. And then for several years, I actually have not been involved in policy work. I came over to the Rape Recovery Center actually right at the start of COVID, so wonderful timing to take on a new ED role. And immediately we were facing, you know, a special session because of everything that was going on with COVID, and realized very quickly that the organization really had no infrastructure related to policy work, and actually really shied away from policy work and kind of only was involved at an arm's length. And because of my policy background and because of the time that we were in, I knew that we had to make some changes. We didn't have a budget for it. We don't have a team for it. And so the way that that's looked is that myself as the executive director began attending meetings and reaching out to folks and just developing relationships like, hey, I'm here. But that wasn't long enough to keep to create the relationships needed to really engage in proactive work. So I'm just saying that to let you know that that is also going to take time. Relationships are really important in doing policy work. But what it did do is it got me to committee meetings and other kinds of advocacy group meetings where I was at least starting to hear and be familiar with probably a lot of the policy work that was going to be happening in the session. You never know everything, but as much that you can have your ear to the ground, you can be more proactive than just reactive. And that is the biggest thing here, is whether you decide to spend like very little time on policy work or a whole lot of time and you want to build out an entire position. The important part is within what you have capacity is to find a way to get at least your ear on the ground, so you have a sense of what work is moving through, because as Kate said, policy work is happening 12 months a year. And if you're not at the table by the fall, by like October, November, you could potentially already be a little late. Never too late, but to be extremely proactive, the sooner the better that you're aware of what's going on. So the way that we did it at the Rape Recovery Center is I have, as executive director, not everybody has this privilege, but I have actually quite a bit of unrestricted funds that fund my position. And so what I did is just kind of figured out how much time could I spend given all of the tasks that I have, knowing that I have some unrestricted fund to really look at policy and take a deep dive. And then I met with one of my staff members who works in our education and outreach team, so they're really external facing. That particular position also has a little bit of unrestricted funds tied to it. And so we worked out a kind of a team model, like I would be going to the meetings, I would be doing a lot of the work, and then she would be supporting me with helping me build out talking points on things, looking at our social media if we need to respond to anything in social media, creating fact sheets. So I'm sharing that with you just in terms of strategy, right? There are different ways that you could do it in-house if you don't have money for a full position. The incorrect fact that nonprofits sometimes believe is that they can engage in policy work. And even some people will say, well, we can do education. You actually can do lobbying as a nonprofit. You just have to be very clear that it is not a significant portion of your time. And so there's some IRS rules related to it, but you don't have to be scared to even of the word lobby. Now, we call ourselves advocates because we aren't traditional lobbyists, but I just want people to know that like you are protected in these situations, but it's up to you, just like any decision that you make for your agency is what kind of budget, constraints do I have here? What kind of staffing constraints? And then you build out what your capacity is from that way forward. So I just wanted to give you all some context of how I've worked it in and how I've thought about it, and to give you maybe some different ways of thinking about it. The other thing that I want to stress, and I probably have some bias here because I'm a social worker, and so we are trained in our work to look at things from the micro, meso, and macro perspective, and they cannot be separated. So everything that happens at the macro level, which is policy, impacts direct services or the direct programming that you do, and vice versa. And so I believe it's actually our it's a duty of ours to be at least somewhat engaged, because everything from appropriations to particular bills are going to impact the way you're funded, are going to impact the way that you're able to deliver your programming, what you're able to say in curriculum. I mean, it really can affect you in so many different ways. The other thing that I kind of want to talk about here is really that the power lies in the collective, right? There are definitely very influential lobbyists in the state at the national level, but the real work happens within the collective, cross-sector, sometimes having allies who would not normally be your allies. And I'll talk about a particular bill where that was the case for us, and how sometimes that still doesn't work. And you have to come back year after year and you build your collective power even stronger. And that is all based on relationship. Having relationships with lawmakers, having relationships with state agencies, having relationships with just folks, again, that maybe are not in your sector, but are in a cross sector that is impacted by the work as much as you are. And then I also want to just talk for a second about really balancing what I'm talking about, which is being involved in having your ear to the ground and not getting so pulled in that you start to pull away from your priorities, because we have limited capacity as nonprofits. And when I show you my legislative tracking tool, the matrix that I have, there are a ton of bills on there. And these are bills that are directly impacting our work and that are directly related to our priorities. And there were probably at least a dozen other that were tangentially related that I actually had to like fully step back and say, like, we can't engage in these conversations. I can't testify in these. I can't provide you any feedback. Really important bills like related to housing that could be related to our work, but we just did not have the capacity. So understanding your capacity and creating a balance, and part of that is done by building your priorities out. So just like the work is done 12 months out of the year, you should be working on your priorities as soon as the session ends. What are my legislative priorities? Whether it's something you want to run or whether it's something that you have a sense may come up in future legislative sessions that could impact you. And then for some of us, funding impacts us every year, and we're always having to watch the appropriations process. And then the sort of last piece is just to really know the players. We heard some examples from some of my colleagues here about, you know, we picked this legislator and there are some limits there and maybe they weren't the best. And I want to be clear that we shouldn't get stuck on the letters behind the name. We do need bipartisanship. That's the most impactful way, especially in Utah, to get bills passed. However, do not underplay if you have an expert on the ground on a particular issue. And I'm going to specifically share, Representative Angela Romero has been the biggest advocate when it comes to sexual assault and domestic violence in the state of Utah, and has been working on sexual assault work since she entered the legislature. Oftentimes, folks will want to run new bills and say, well, let's get a new legislator, which is not a bad idea. But if you know that there's a legislator that has the connections and the expertise, you should always connect with them first. Because A, they may be interested in running your bill, or they may actually have a better strategy for you in terms of who might be a better sponsor for your bill. So don't always assume it is just based on the letters behind their name, because as I'll share with one of the bills that we had huge success on, she was able to bring pretty much almost every group that would normally be in opposition on a sexual assault bill on the same side of the bill. And we did that on two bills. One bill passed and one did not pass. And it was an interesting learning lesson why one of them maybe did not pass. So keep that in mind. Knowing your players also means don't underestimate who the experts are on particular issues, and check in with them. Also, as one of my colleagues noted, is it's important to bring in your constituency into this. We are also looking at what it would look like to build out an advocacy 101 for survivors of sexual assault and supporters of in the fight to end sexual assault, because we know that those voices can be really powerful when they're coming directly from their constituents to the folks who sit on the committee and then when bills move to the floor. And so that's also an area that we're looking on, is how we can create some really basic citizen advocacy education for people who care about the issue, about issues related to sexual violence. Okay, so that's like the professorial version of what I'm going to say, but I want to kind of show you some images. I think it's helpful. I'm a visual learner, and it could be really helpful to see how some folks manage this work. And so the first thing I'm going to show you, I'm actually showing you a copy. This is not my most updated version of this tracking sheet, but I'll show you what it looks like. The tracking device on the legislature is awesome. So what I would do is, if you don't know how to use that, you can track on the legislature's website, but I create this matrix because then it allows me to create notes. It allows me to share the document with staff, or with, I had an intern who was helping me with policy work. So that's another thing. Maybe bring on an intern if you have the ability to bring on an intern who could help you. The intern that I was working with was primarily managing the text in this particular document for me. Okay, so this is just like it's just a basic Google sheet, and it has all of the bills. It has links to the bills, and then we would just keep updated on the status. We started marking the bills that we support or maybe do not support. And so this is just a really easy, non-complicated way that you can track your bills. And I'm gonna share and unshare because sometimes it goes off of, it won't show you everything. The next thing I'm gonna show you is a sample fact sheet. So this was done in Canva. So we did not have to have a fancy Adobe software. This was all done in Canva. And this was in partnership with the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault. But someone from my education outreach team actually created this, and they just kind of used a flyer, like a base template of a flyer, and created a fact sheet out of it. These are really helpful. And one of my suggestions about being prepared ahead of time is you never know what the legislator, especially someone who's sponsoring a bill, may need from you. And so my suggestion is to just have them prepared, and when they ask for them, you already have something, a sample that you can say, hey, does this work? And so it doesn't mean you have to spend hours. Again, this was a template in Canva. It didn't take very long to put together. And then the last thing that I'm going to show you is so one of the bills, well, I'm going to show you a couple things related to this. One of the bills that we were working on was, let's see, sorry, make sure I name the right bill, HB 168, which is a ban on the sale of do-it-yourself sexual assault kits. We actually did not think that this would be a very controversial bill. And we ended up experiencing some really powerful lobbyists from a national company, a national tech company that is behind the development of one of these kits, spent actually quite a bit of money lobbying. And something that they did, which is really unfortunate, and why I'm so strong about being proactive and having your ear to the ground. If we didn't have our ear to the ground, we may not have known some of the things were going on. So this particular lobbyist created this website that was basically a petition. I'm just showing you a screenshot. They made it look like it was us. And so what they did is they took our language that we normally use to talk about this work and sort of flipped it. So when you read the petition and you saw our name at the top of the tab up there, it looked like we were telling you, the community, to not support this particular bill when we were actually supporting the bill. So we found ourselves having to react very quickly. And what we decided to do was create some basic graphics in Canva and do some social media posts. We were very careful not to tell people what to do, but to inform them about the process. That also resulted in us doing a Facebook Live. I did an Instagram story. And so I'm sharing that with you to tell you that you don't have to do all of that, but there are different ways that you can get to audiences that have an interest or may be impacted by things. And there's also some things that can happen. Folks can make it sound like organizations connected to you support the legislation they're doing. We actually had our organization's name quoted on the floor of a bill we weren't even working on, because they thought, oh, if people, have this sense that this organization is supported. And in that particular case, I don't think they were trying to be deceitful, but they had heard something from somebody and it never even came from us. So again, it's very important for you to have relationships with people who do this work, because at the very least, they'll tell you, hey, this thing is going on, you probably should respond or react. So the last thing I'm going to show you is our Instagram page, which gets a lot of, it's a tool that gets a lot of interaction. So we created so we did some posts. This is me talking about the forensic exams. This is us talking about HB 168, and then we pinned it to our stories so that people could find it very quickly and easily. And then we just gave people some basic facts about the kits. And again, this was all done in Canva. So I know that was fast and it was a lot of information, but I wanted to give you some sort of real world experience of how we've done it with basically no budget and no policy person, but how it was essential for us to be involved. So I kind of did it backwards. I gave you my takeaways at the beginning, but if anybody has any questions, I'll be around. Please feel free to drop them in the chat. Brandy, I don't know if there was any follow-up of anything that I didn't hit that you wanted me to hit.
That was an incredible overview. Thank you so much. I am learning so much from all of you. I'm just so grateful for your time. I have a running list of notes that I'm keeping track of. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm thoroughly impressed by the amount of advocacy and work that goes into reaching everyone's mission. Just thank you so much. I'd like to introduce everyone to Josh. Josh, you're up.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for having me. My name is Josh Kraft. I am the Government and Corporate Relations Manager for Utah Clean Energy, and we are a nonprofit organization that works on the broad range of energy and climate issues here in our lovely state. So that's renewable energy, electric vehicles, renewable energy, rooftop solar, and the broad range of things. We also do increasingly a lot of outreach and engagement with the public and with business and community leaders on climate change issues. And that's sort of been our focus. This is our 20th year, so we're celebrating that. And I do our work, advocacy work at the Capitol. And I'll just say, I think this is my 7th year total doing active work in state houses. My 5th session, or whatever we thought about this session was, working at the Utah State Legislature. And I don't really think that I have any really great strategy tips to provide for people. I think it's been an amazing learning for me to hear the different ways that people approach sessions. But I have some ideas that I'll share. I just wanted to note that we are often in our own world in energy and climate, and sometimes it's very narrow. And I want to say that I want to invite everyone to partner with us and to ask us to partner with you. And like all of you, we have to make strategic choices and focus in certain areas to have an impact. So I mean that as in a sense of, if you think we could be helpful, we're working in this area of climate change in particular that has a broad impact on the lives of our children, our grandchildren, but we know that we need to learn to move outside of our comfort zone, to learn how we're being served unequally by the systems that we've established, and to and to look into areas where, again, we're not comfortable with, but where perhaps we can provide also some expertise. We do a ton of work before the Public Service Commission, and so if anyone has any issues there, or with the Building Code Commission, we do a lot of work there and would love to be helpful outside of the session. I'll also note that I think that this is a really exciting but also a challenging time in energy. We are undergoing a major energy transition away from largely from fossil fuels towards more renewable energy sources, more electric vehicles, which is exciting for air quality. We also, this state, Utah, has a ton of tremendous of our own assets to work on in this area that will help our economy and our communities. At the same time, we know that this isn't just a technical process or a technological process. It will involve burdens for different communities. Particularly, we're concerned about the state of some of our energy producing communities, which tend to be in rural Utah. And so I'll just say that it's, and we're gonna see, I think, the next 4 years of the Biden administration will be a very interesting time, I think, of some innovation, some new collaboration, but also some tension on those questions about energy choices and public lands. So that's my preface for what we do and how we might partner. I will say, if I have any things to offer, the comments about how you engage with the state legislature have been so great. I'll already. I don't want to be duplicative, but I will say that know your power, know where you can have an impact, and try to be fearless in that. And along those specifically, I would just point out 4 things. One is to know your key stakeholders. We are in a very highly regulated area that has a very set of concentrated players. So we have 2 monopoly utilities, Rocky Mountain Power and Dominion. They're very important to the decisions that are made. They're very influential in decisions that get made. So know their position, engage with them if you can. If you're knowing the state agencies, the Public Service Commission, and the major one, that is an appointed body that the governor sets these 3 commissioners that make most of decisions about rates in the state. There's also an Office of Energy Development. And then there's a lot of clean energy companies, solar companies, energy efficiency companies, but knowing those folks is really important. As with all issues, public pressure is extraordinarily important if you want to get the attention of legislators, particularly if you are opposing a piece of legislation. We saw there was a lot of work. We worked on HB 209, which was an electric vehicle fee bill, would have added some fees that got a lot of attention. We heard a lot of things from legislators, and we got a fair amount of press. We got a lot of responses from legislators because of that. We worked on some other areas in the building with regard to our standards for our new buildings that we didn't get the kind of public pressure and interest in, and we didn't hear the same things from legislators. So public pressure is usually your friend, particularly if you need to make changes to a bill that is problematic. Make sure, as Sonia was saying, you need to identify your champions. Representative Romero is an awesome example of someone who, whatever the label is on her name, she partners with a series of folks who don't always agree with her on issues and gets things done. But these are folks, first of all, your eyes and your ears. They tell you what's going on 12 months out of the year, not just, but then particularly during the session. And legislators can only focus on so many things. So whether it's a personal interest or an interest to their constituents, to their district, find those folks who are on the committees that are likely to stay engaged on the issues that you care about, and then be your sponsors. Their colleagues will look to them for answers, even sometimes when they disagree. That's important. For us, it's the House Public Utilities Energy Technology Committee, and then the Senate Transportation and Public Utilities Committee. They're the committees that we care most about, and we need to really form relationships, even with folks who we often don't see eye to eye with, to get things done. And I'll just say the final thing is that there are some questions about public comments, and I don't know that I have any wisdom really to bring there in terms of hearings, but to the extent that you can, bringing in experts, whether it's a technology expert or someone with experience, to both the interim committees and the session committees helps establish credibility for you and to build trust. legislators, I think, whenever, even though I sometimes have a somewhat skeptical attitude towards different legislators, they are, they know when they're hearing a sales pitch, and they know when they're hearing someone providing something that's more or less factual. And I think that that will really help to get people who, again, may sort of be skeptical of the label that you bring to them or the perspective in your name. Our name says clean energy, but it really helps to have, you know, they get, okay, this person's information is serious, and that helps to persuade folks. And you might not win on the bill, but you'll get some, you know, you usually get some, build credibility for the future, maybe persuade a few folks. So I want to just round out my comments by saying that I thought that this was kind of a mediocre session in terms of our issues. It was fine, given the pandemic and a new governor, a lot of new legislators, and a new administration at the federal level. It's sort of how we expected it to end up. It was not that, I don't think that was much of a surprise. You know, I don't, anyway, I want to note a couple of the highs. From our perspective, the good things, we were able to push back and defeat this bill, HB 209, which would have abruptly hiked fees on electric vehicles. That was a concern to us. We're hoping to engage further how we pay for our roads, an important question. There were some great investments in public transportation and also in affordable housing. And I think that those were important for our quality, and they're also opportunities for us to work with stakeholders to make our housing stock not only more affordable, but also more energy efficient. We had some lows in the buildings area in particular. We do a lot of work with energy efficiency in our built environment. There was a bill that SB 33 that changed the nature of the Code Commission, the Uniform Building Code Commission, which establishes standards for new buildings. I know we're getting a lot into the weeds, but this is kind of this is for me, us for legislative game, finding those committees and agencies that are going to make decisions between legislative sessions. And so we're concerned that some of the changes there may make it harder for us to adopt good consumer protection measures and good energy efficiency measures in our residential buildings. We also had a climate resolution we worked on with Representative Steve Handy, HCR 5, that would have established a recognized goal, the need for goals for greenhouse gas emissions and for air pollution. That went absolutely nowhere. It got stuck in the House Rules Committee because different opponents industry were opposed, and so that was disappointing. But okay, and we'll find a way to move forward there next year. I'll wrap up by saying that there are a couple things. Well, I'll just say that we can see a lot of debates that we're going to have in the state moving forward. That's another thing you always learn during the session. We're going to continue to have some tough fights about the role of rooftop solar in our state. There was a bill that was introduced very late that didn't go anywhere. There's also going to be a really interesting discussion about how we heat our homes and gas. There was a bill that seeks to, the National Gas Association is seeking to prevent communities from banning new natural gas connections. And I'll just say that that's part of the climate fight, that it's going to require a lot of change. There's nothing wrong with natural gas. We're not demonizing the industry, but it is a fight that we're going to have as we try to decarbonize our built environment, our homes, and our heating systems. So I'll just say I want to stop. I put our legislative tracking document in the chat. If folks want to take a look at all the bills that we looked at, I'll also put my email into the chat, josh@utahcleanenergy.org. Would love to be in contact with you and to partner, and really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Wow. Yes. The work continues, right? And I do encourage you, everyone on the call, to put your contact information in the chat if you're looking to connect with others. And thank you so much, Josh, for getting that conversation started as well, because as we hear over and over today, collaboration is key. And our speaker, I would like to turn the time over to now, Courtney.
Hi, I'm gonna quickly share my screen. I've got a few slides, but honestly, oops, this is my, get that out of there. Here we go. Can you see this okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Everybody said such awesome stuff, and so I really don't have too many new ideas to share, I think. I was just really floored, honestly, at all of the advocacy that's happening here in Utah, and I think that, like everyone said, collaboration is super, super key, and working with different partners. And so I work in the healthcare sphere of things, and so we have a ton of collaboration and advocacy efforts that kind of live over there, but then learning about, you know, all of the advocacy that happens in these other spaces is just really cool to hear about, because sometimes we really don't touch unless we, you know, we hear about it. So in spaces like these. So it's just really, really awesome. And so this is a little bit about Utah Health Policy Project. I'm the Education Collaborations Director over there. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization working to advance sustainable healthcare solutions for underserved Utahns through better access, education, and public policy. And so that kind of says a little bit about what we do, but we really do take a layered approach in how we address advocacy. And I found it super interesting just to see, I think it was Bike Utah that showed just where they place staff and kind of what they're funded to do, and not having any staff do policy doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do it. It probably just changes the dynamic. And at UHPP, we do have designated staff to do policy. And so that might, just when I show you kind of our bill tracker and what we do, I think it does loosen up a bit of space and time for staff to put directly to this. But that means, you know, that if you partner with us or you partner with someone who really is putting a lot of effort into policy, then you might be able to get this kind of information or work done without having designated staff of your own to doing it. So again, it's just finding ways to collaborate with other organizations, finding advocacy meetings. We host during the session a healthcare roundtable with a bunch of healthcare advocates. And so just kind of jumping into those spaces and taking advantage of other organizations that might have designated staff that maybe you don't have at this time, and working together. And then something that's a little bit unique about Utah Health Policy Project is that we do have a direct service team of employees. And so we have the policy staff, which is where I'm on, and then we have Take Care Utah, which is a team of health access assisters who actually work within communities throughout Utah, helping people to enroll in health insurance. So primarily we help people enroll in Medicaid, the ACA, Affordable Care Act plans. We're doing a bit of Medicare now as well. But this is something that is really useful for meetings with legislators, is if you can find some type of service that you can offer them. This is something that I've found to be really helpful when I'm meeting with a legislator is, hey, you know, you might have a constituent contact you and they have an issue with their health care or their health insurance, which happens a ton, because we all know we've probably all had an issue with our health insurance or our health care at some point. And so then we say, we have a team of people who can help your constituent for free. We'd like to offer that service to you. And so that's a way, you don't owe the legislator anything when you meet with them necessarily. But we work in healthcare, and a lot of the other lobbyists are, you know, writing checks or providing some type of service that benefits the legislator. And that's not what we do as consumer advocates. So if we can offer them anything in any way, then I think that it's a really good way for them to remember us. And so we did a lot of that this last session, just right off the bat, kind of offering the service to constituents. And I do think that it has helped establish better relationships. And we also do federal advocacy as well as state advocacy. And so we've offered this to constituent services at Senator Lee and Senator Romney's offices, which was a really great way to connect and establish a relationship with them. So that's our Take Care Utah team. And then a lot of these bullet points have been discussed already by the awesome other advocates that presented before I did, but I'll quickly just go through some of it. Let's see if this will pull up. Okay, I don't think oh, there we go. Can you guys see this? This is our bill tracker.
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. So we put our bill tracker onto our website. We have like a whole tab for the 2021 session. And we track a lot of bills. So we do healthcare, which is super broad. And so the bills that we track are everywhere. And so I think there are probably over 70 bills for this session that we track. And so this updates automatically at midnight every night so people can go and see where the bill is going to be the next day. We don't necessarily actively advocate on each of these bills, so we did not testify for all of these bills, for example. But we do try to stay connected to who is behind these bills and how can we help if we need to, or can we connect through our grassroots advocacy, can we connect consumers to these bills if they're interested in them, things like that. So, and then right below we have our call to action portal, ways to get involved, ways to express interest just in doing general healthcare advocacy, updates for each week of the session, and then at the end we'll get into the bills that we were tracking that passed. So we utilize social media a ton during the session. It's really important. I would say Twitter is just really, for healthcare at least, it's just really important to be on and tracking what everyone is talking about. And it's just a way to, we've done press releases on Twitter this year, where normally we would just email them out to our press list, but sometimes it's just not fast enough. So we'll just put out kind of a public statement on Twitter, and it's ended up being more effective sometimes in reaching media locally and in some cases nationally as well. And then we just really utilize our website. We update, my coworker is really great at just doing really quick updates onto the website during the session. We do call to action requests throughout the whole session, those weekly updates. And then a big one is storytelling events. And so I think some people kind of got at this. It's really important to integrate real stories and real life experiences when you're talking to legislators. And so some people do that through like a flyer or having like a printout of their constituent's face and their story to tell. We do, like, we've done, I think 2 or 3 last year. We did like Facebook Live storytelling events where we just open it up to the general community to share an experience that they've had with a particular part of healthcare, whether it was like the Affordable Care Act or Medicaid, or not having access to insurance. So we documented those stories, and then we typically ask where the person is from, and then we can help them connect with their legislator. And so last year we were trying to meet on a particular bill, and we found constituents of leadership, and we were able to meet with every member of leadership that we wanted to that session, because we had constituents that we were facilitating those conversations, and it turned out to be really successful. So if you utilize social media to target certain zip codes or areas where you know that leadership is, I think that can be really effective, or it has been effective for us. And then also just being an education resource to the community. We put out really fast fact sheets during the session if a bill comes up that we weren't necessarily expecting, but we want to take a position on it. We try to get a 1-pager or a 2-pager out within the week if we can, so that legislators really see us as a resource as well as, an advocate, because sometimes, we have a history of pushing against some of the things that the legislature has done, and that has helped. We've kind of had to figure those relationships out after, kind of being opposed to a lot of things that they've done for a while. We've had to mend those relationships, and I think a way of doing that is just getting them to see you as, you know your stuff, and the policy, and they can rely on you to provide them really good information. And then just the last one is maximize interim sessions, which I think a lot of people have already talked about and stressed, and I just think that's really, really important and key. And then this is just a bit about the kind of session that we had. We had some bills that we supported pass, which is really great. Most of these do focus on access, whether it's access to a particular type of healthcare, like contraception for inmates, or the epinephrine auto-injector access amendments, or whether it's access to insurance. We made some really great progress on children's health insurance. Then we have made progress in the oral health space with the last one, and then right above that, caregiver compensation amendments. So we had some really great successes this last session of bills that we have supported. And then you'll see we had just about the same amount that were not successful. And I think we've heard that today too, that it is slow and steady. And I mean, we're the group that did Medicaid expansion via a ballot initiative. So we know, right? 6 years in the legislature with Medicaid expansion wasn't successful. So we finally did a ballot initiative to try to get that done. And then they repealed the ballot initiative and then we had to keep going. So I think, but now we have full Medicaid expansion, right? So I think you just have to keep plugging away. It can take up to 10 years. It can take a long time, but you make progress each time. And these are all great interim bill priorities for us now. So everything that we worked on that didn't make it through, now we keep working. Was it an issue with the sponsor? Was it an issue with the fiscal note? Was it an issue with getting the appropriations? Whatever it was, we'll analyze that. We'll talk about it, and we will keep trying for next year. Yeah, so I think I'll try to cut off there. This is a way to contact us. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and you can see the bill tracker that I talked about, or policy updates. And if you'd like to get involved or just connect with us, then we would love that as well. Like I said, we host our healthcare roundtable every week during the legislative session, and we have a pretty big listserv of that, and we're always looking for more people to join and join our advocacy community on healthcare. And so would love to connect with you.
Thank you so much, Courtney. I was taking notes the whole time. I love your bill tracker and all the data that's included in there. As we wrap up our time together, I'm going to be putting some things into the chat because Courtney just lined this up perfectly. Policy and advocacy happens at the state level and at the federal level. UNA, we work at both levels, and we're very active, and we try to be as active as possible at both levels. So I just put into the chat 2 town halls that we have coming up with Congressman Stewart and Congressman Curtis. On those pages, you'll also see, because you've heard about committees, commissions, and the different things that our elected representatives are involved in. You'll also see on those events the committees that they're on. So there may be something that they're involved in that directly impacts the mission of your nonprofit. The last thing I'd like to bring up is that this is not the end. We've heard this we've heard this a few times today, and it's important for us to stay connected. At UNA, we have kicked off at the beginning of this session a advocacy league. It's an email group that you can subscribe to. This is open to all UNA members, nonprofit members, and all you need to do is send an email to the address I just put in, and you will be added to the advocacy league. This is a great place to connect with others who have that cross-sector collaboration, collective work that we can do together. This is also where you can ask about different committees, different initiatives, what's going on at interim, and we definitely want to create that space where we can all connect together. If you send an email to this, our staff will receive it, and then we'll get you into that group so you can start connecting with other nonprofits throughout the state. So I have one question, and if we don't know the answer today, oh, thank you, Sonia. Don't forget to thank the legislators and partners who support your policy work. Absolutely, it's always important to thank them. A couple of things that I've started to do is I have Google alerts set up for different representatives, so that if they pop up in the news or if they pop up in Twitter, I get an alert that tells me that they're doing something. And whether it pertains to what I'm doing at that particular time, I may send a congratulations, saw you in this news article. It's one of those great ways to build relationships as well. So I have a question for the panelists before we close out. When a bill finally gets to the governor, how can you find out when the governor will sign that bill? Anybody got an idea on that? Kate?
I set up legislative tracking on the state's le.utah.gov. I track the bills. So I get to see at each step in the process, particularly at the final piece, where that bill is. Some of the bills that I've been following, especially this week, are starting to show that they are enrolled for, they're sent here for enrolling, that the governor's signing them, that kind of thing. That's how I check it.
And that came from one of our participants. So I want to make sure, does that help answer your question? I don't want to speak on your behalf.
That came from me. This is Mark Dixon. And I have also got those legislative tracking notifications that arrived to me. And the last notification I got is that it was from House to Governor's office. But what I'd really like to know is when the governor is actually going to put pen to paper on this.
Yeah, they don't really tell you. You don't have that timeline. And I'll show you an example really quick. Sorry, I don't know why I'm so obsessed with showing examples today. But these are some of the bills that I'm tracking, and you can see some of them say signed, and some of them are still to governor. And it's probably, I'm assuming, just the way that he prioritizes signing of those stacks every day.
I think Josh may have a golden nugget for us.
Well, they do have a market that, and everyone, there's the significant session dates is a link on the front of the website, and I put in the link there, and it's always a good reminder for me when I look through the session. The governor has until March 25th to make a decision about signing or vetoing any bills. And if it's a not controversial bill and it was generally supported, you probably shouldn't worry too much about whether the date which they sign it. He'll sign a lot of bills in the last few days. If he does veto the bill, then there's this whole question about an override session, and depending on what the bill is. So that's something extends the process out. But mostly it'll be next week. So
I was going to say, we
Thank
may
you,
not
Josh.
have an exact date, but we know there's a deadline. Thank you so much, Josh. And with that, I would like to thank you all for joining us for this recap and to learn and connect with each other. Please do join us at our future advocacy events, get involved in the Advocacy League. And I just want to say thank you all so much for your time today.